So I'm coming from a slightly different perspective to Pedro. I'm outside the football club world, don't work professionally for any clubs, but I've been working with Optadata for a few years now. I'm very interested in making more available publicly and being able to analyze kind of specific match events in more detail. So one particular bugbear of mine is watching matches, and I'm sure everybody has their own thing, but for me it's whenever a player knocks a big diagonal ball from one side to the other, and if it reaches who they intended to, people say, what a great pass. If it doesn't, sometimes you go, well, not such a big deal. Well, how do we analyze that? What do we look for in that? Quantitatively, how do we say that that's good or bad? So I'll just read quickly from the proposed abstract that I put in terms of this. Diagonal crossfield passes often have excellent aesthetic qualities, but my intuition is that they rarely lead directly to an effective attack. So you can clearly see where I fall in this before looking at any data. So I'd like to reach a conclusion on whether managers and coaches should encourage or discourage players from attempting such a pass. So interestingly, I think I've taken slightly similar methodology to what Pedro was talking about, but you can assess that for yourself as we go along. So, sorry if you can't see that very clearly, but the types of passes we're looking at go from this bluish area at the top to that bluish area at the bottom, and obviously vice versa from right to left across the pitch as well. So I took the F24 feed from Opta for the top 5 European leagues. Well, top 5, subjective, but we'll probably agree on those. And I took all of last season's matches and all of the matches up until, I think, prior to the last weekend of this season. So in the first part of this analysis, we just take the simple event, take the event on its own, in isolation using the start and end coordinates and the outcome as supplied in the F24 feed as a success or failure. Did it reach a teammate? So across the different leagues, this is the result we get from that. The numbers beside each league are how many of these passes were attempted. You can see there's a fairly consistent 40-ish% success rate, so less than half already as a starting point. But it's quite interesting that it's pretty similar across all the different leagues, even if there's a slight variety in quantity. So whenever we take that as a overall across all the leagues, so in 2,855 matches, there were 14,000 of these events, and 40% reached a teammate directly, about 4.9 per match. So I broke that down and looked at which teams attempt this the most. So some unsurprising names at the top there, I suppose. Stoke coming second would be quite familiar. Quite an array of teams, I would have said. Interesting to see Bayern Munich in there, Chelsea as well, Everton featuring quite highly. And remember, this is across last season and this season so far. What you can see in the blue is the success, and the red is the failure, obviously. Then whenever we change that and we look at actually the success percentage for the teams, this list contains a lot more of the teams who tend to have finished higher in each of the leagues. We've already got Juventus, Bayern, Barcelona as the top 3, Madrid in there, we've got Dortmund, PSG, so an awful lot of the top teams. So maybe you could say, well, the better teams know how to use this more effectively. You can see the varying quantity again along here. But the interesting thing whenever you pick this out is, well, look at the success rates. So Madrid had a 0.5 success rate on this, which means that only those top 5 teams have 0.5 and above. So equivalent to kicking the ball up in the air and seeing who gets it. But, that's kind of an interesting indication of nobody's really using this incredibly effectively, or at least not consistently. So from 112 clubs, only 5 clubs had a success rate of 0.5 or better. Only 2 clubs had a success rate of 0.55 or better, Juventus and Bayern Munich. But whenever we go a bit further with this and we say, well, maybe some players are better at this than others, it's going to vary with skill set on that. Again, using the same approach, this is the the players who attempted this type of pass the most. An awful lot of defenders and goalkeepers. Notable in there, Steven Gerrard popping up very high on the list as a midfielder. Rakitic as well at Sevilla. But the likes of Dante, Williams, Dawson, all centre defenders who are maybe using this as a way to try and change play whenever a shorter pass isn't available. Again, switching this round to look at the success percentage for the players. So in this case, I've removed any players that didn't attempt 10 of these passes because there were an awful lot of guys who had one pass that succeeded. So you're not really interested in those. See some kind of big names. That's Xavi, is Hernandez there, the second one, Barcelona. But most of these guys who have a good success rate have an incredibly small number of these passes. Remember, again, this is over across basically a season and a half. And the majority of these have less than 15 of these passes, except for the guy 25th on the list. And I was delighted that he showed up on this list. Steven Gerrard, over double the number of attempts of these passes. Sorry if at the back if you're struggling to see that, but Gerrard has a 0.63 success rate with I think 59 of these passes. So an obvious outlier in that list. And just to give you an idea what these kind of look like, this is a quick chalkboard of those passes, blue being successful, red being unsuccessful. So you can see the kind of areas that he's playing from and to. Just a quick look at who receives these passes. So 3 English number 9s, as some might call them, at the top, showing that style of play perhaps is more indicative of a Premier League that has a variety of styles of play as opposed to some of the other leagues that maybe don't. But you'd have to do further analysis on that, I would say, but that's an early indication perhaps. Interesting to see Müller at Bayern Munich and Ronaldo quite high on the list. So I guess Munich and Madrid trying to use those diagonals to exploit space. But, generally quite a few strikers in that list, I would say, which is more or less what you would expect. Sterling popping up there at around 25th for Liverpool. So, using a very basic analysis of just taking the pass itself, the start position, the end position, and the outcome, what can we conclude from this? Is there enough to make an informed decision about how good this type of pass is or whether it's an effective tool? Personally, I think it's leaning one way, but you don't really have an awful lot of information to go on. Still a very basic level of analysis here. And I guess especially whenever so many players attempt these so few times, it's difficult to make conclusive conclusions. But the key thing for me, and I guess this is tying in slightly with some of the stuff Pedro was saying, is what happens next? Okay, the ball arrives at the player, but does he get tackled? Does he pass it backwards? Does he have a bad touch and the ball goes out of play? Can we analyse that diagonal crossfield pass using the next action? Or at least can we use that next action to contribute to how we analyse that crossfield pass? So again, taking the F24 feed, trying to pull out what the next action is, and I've kind of broken it into some very top level categories. Was the next action a goal? Was it a shot on target? So, was that pass so conclusive that it took the defence out of the equation and the attacker was straight in on goal? Was it generally positive? So did they have a shot off target, which was maybe from a bad position? Was it then a final third pass, a cross? Did they win a free kick? And comparing that to the number of negative outcomes, did he immediately lose possession? Was the ball immediately cleared? Did he give away a foul? And there's a bunch of other events in the middle that it's quite difficult to say whether it was a positive or negative next action. So processing all that data, running the numbers on it, this is what I come out with, that there were 17 goals immediately after one of these diagonal passes, 159 shots on target, 2,000 odd positive events, negative events just under 2,000 again. And remember, this is based on the events which initially were a positive outcome. So the ball reached the attacking player, and then something happened. And this is that event. So you add this negative event to the previous events where the ball was given away, and you end up with kind of more negative outcomes like this. So this initial one on the left is the 40% which reaches the player. After you've included the next action, that 40% drops down to 17%. There's 10% in there that, you know, maybe something good happened after that, maybe not, you can't really tell, but it's fairly conclusive that 73% of the total actions were a negative action. They lost the ball, or that was the end of that phase of play. So you still want to know what happens next on those events that aren't conclusive. So this is where we get into kind of a much more difficult part of processing, is adding consecutive events into a sequence of events and then trying to analyze that sequence of events to determine whether it was a positive outcome or a negative outcome. Part of this idea came from a really good post, a couple of posts that Sam Green did on the OptaPro blog, I think about 18 months ago, talking about this kind of analysis and, you know, potential uses of it. I'd recommend you check those out. But essentially, these can be, you know, anything as short as 2 or 3 passes, or it could be 20, 30 passes, depending on just the specific events and the outcome on each. So we want to take the whole broad phase of play that a diagonal ball happened in and look at, you know, what was the outcome of that phase of play. The goals obviously increase a bit, up to 39 goals in these phases of play. Shots on target, 621. And again, we're seeing, you know, more negative, as in losing the ball or being dispossessed or some other event like that. Again, these come into play kind of further after the diagonal ball has been hit. Just a quick percentage, so 4.7% of these phases of play result in a shot on target, and under 1% result in a goal. One of the things that might be interesting to look at is how soon after the diagonal pass these kind of final event of the phase of play occur. So, you know, we know if the next event was a goal, the diagonal pass was essentially an assist. So obviously you would weight that quite highly. But, you know, if a goal occurs 10 passes later, how, you know, would you really say the diagonal pass was instrumental in that happening? You probably have to analyze it further. But, you know, focus on how much effect did the diagonal pass have. And what this graph is showing is along the bottom you have the number of events that occur. So event 0 is the diagonal pass. So event 1, you can see we have a small number of goals. Interestingly, we have more shots on target than off target. I'll maybe come back to talk about that a little bit later on, but perhaps there's something to be said for getting a striker into a good position where they can make that shot on target. I think this spike that we see on the second event, and this is me purely speculating, I haven't run the numbers on this, but I would assume that perhaps that first event might have been an aerial duel where, you know, it was a knockdown or something like that, and then the shot occurred after that. So perhaps that's why that goes up, but again, more analysis would be required for that. And then we see it tailing off quite a lot after 4 or 5 passes, or 4 or 5 events. These aren't necessarily passes, they could be other events, but typically they would be pass events. So going back to looking at kind of teams who are effective on this. So 6 teams scored twice in a phase of play involving a diagonal pass across the data that I looked at. Stoke are in there. I'm sure that's maybe no surprise, but still quite a low number really. Perhaps looking at the likes of Barcelona, Bayern Munich, you could be talking about the different qualities of attackers that they would have, that whenever you successfully get them into a one-on-one position or into a lot of space, that they can use it better. But again, I haven't analysed that to go into the detail of the specific events. So whenever we take this on and we add the third phase into the overall picture, we go from where the pass itself was successful 40% of the time to, at the end of the possession phase involving that pass, we have a 15% positive outcome. You know, shots, corners won, things like that. And again, less than 1% resulting directly in a goal, but almost 5% resulting in a shot on target. So coming back to Steven Gerrard, who was the outlier on the initial graph that we looked at, of his 59 passes, they resulted in 8 shots on target, 13.5%, which is, you know, over double the overall average. So it shows that perhaps he is quite or more effective on this than a lot of players, and 3 shots off target, 5%. So, you know, whenever you're assessing this, possibly looking at the individual player and saying, well, you know, we can take his own stats and look at how good he is at this pass, and add in this kind of analysis to determine if you should encourage him to continue doing it or tie him up. So that was the analysis piece, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the methodology, which I think Pedro's covered a little bit at, but the reason why I kind of put this forward is because I think this is quite a new alternative methodology. It's going beyond the individual event statistic and trying to add more contextual information of other related events to analyse phases of play instead of just events in isolation. So to do this, you can't really just, you know, fire up Excel and start doing this. I mean, the data processing to try and tie events together into phases of play requires quite a lot of manipulation, also requires quite a lot of time going through all of Opta's events. There's quite a few of them, and all the qualifiers and little intricacies that they make available. You have to think carefully about how you're going to design a database to store this, how you're going to actually be able to get information back out of it in any kind of reasonable way. And to do that, you need effective, you know, query tools. And, you know, there will be some off-the-shelf network analysis tools that you can use, but bespoke software can always get you so much further, which is what the approach I took. Everything here was done using manual, processing scripts that I made, a database that I created, and a set of query tools as well. So my background is actually in this kind of area. It's building tools from a computer science background, or the trendy way of saying that now is that I'm an app developer. But I've built the 442 StatZone app, which provides real-time access to all of the every kick of the ball F24 feed that Opta provide. So it's available for all of those leagues. But I've always worked with these kind of data products, and while StatZone provides, you know, that individual event access, you can go in and see the assists, you can go in and see the shots. Moving on to the next layer, I don't think there's certainly no public tools that I'm aware of available that allow you to do that kind of phase of play analysis, to add the context to those events without going in and looking at the video manually yourself to determine how effective those events were. So having tools like that will let you ask new questions that perhaps weren't available to you before. So another quick piece of analysis that I ran using the same tools was I looked at passes received in this blue area just outside the penalty area in matches this season. And these were the top 5 players who received the ball in that area, and then in that phase of play resulted in a shot. So Barkley at Everton was right up there, top of the list. You can see Cabaye, Suarez, Cazorla, Ozil. So no real surprise in those names, but this gives a different way of analysing how these players work, the kind of networks, again, that Pedro was talking about, looking at how they interact with the team and what the output of that action is, in a different way to looking at just the individual action itself. And broadly, again, as part of all this, it's looking at what are the tools that we need to do the future of analytics. So taking it beyond statistics, where you just want to get numbers out, but looking at phases of play, game states, with and without player comparisons, things like player combinations, looking at how a back four defend whenever these 4 players are playing versus whenever you take one of those out, do they concede goals differently? And all of this kind of plays into the idea of big data, which is misunderstood a lot. I mean, big data doesn't mean a lot of data. It means a significantly different way of analysing data to look for pattern matches and trend matches, as opposed to pulling out individual events. And having these kinds of context added to individual events lets you do that and lets you see what the patterns are. And again, it's focusing on more context. But we need new tools to do this. So I'm very interested in building these tools. All of that work was done with a very early prototype of the type of tool that I have in mind. But I'm very curious to address these issues, whether it's inside a club, outside a club. But those are my contact details if you want to get in touch about it. And I'll leave you to conclude on your own whether or not you think diagonal crossfield passes should be encouraged or not. Great.